The Denver Broncos quarterback competition shouldn't take long for Sean Payton to decide. When is the appropriate timeline and when should he announce a starter for the 2024 NFL season? We'll tell you what we think he should do on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into yet another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you once again to all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day every single day. Subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. We have exclusive, in-depth Denver Broncos news, analysis, content, coverage, and more every single day all year long. And look, we're getting ready to dive into the three biggest questions that the Denver Broncos need to have answered when training camp begins or in training camp on today's episode of the show. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover the team in person daily in Dove Valley, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, longtime voice over there, site expert, predominantly orange.com. He's been around Broncos Country for quite some time here. And look, we have a lot to break down. Training camp right around the corner. Broncos Country, the wait is almost over. You know what that means? There's going to be a lot of hyperbole. There's going to be a lot of analysis. There's going to be a lot of storylines that start to take place the moment that this team sets foot on the field. But before they do that, what are some of the biggest questions that they need to have answered in training camp? And Sayre, to be honest with you, I think first and foremost, the number one question outside of who's going to win the starting job for the quarterback position is how long should it take for Sean Payton, the Broncos, to decide who the starter week one against the Seattle Seahawks will be? This is the biggest question for the Broncos as they go into training camp.
It is, because you don't want any sort of contrived quarterback competition, right? You want to, if Sean Payton knows that Bo Nix is the starter, like, hey, let's get with the program, buddy. You know what I'm saying? It shouldn't be just, well, there's the seniority and Jarrett Stidham spent a whole year in Sean Payton's offense. I mean, there is an element of honoring that. And if Jarrett Stidham is practicing better and he's got better chemistry with the receivers and he's running the offense better, then that's a different story completely. But if this team knows the direction and they know exactly, hey, let's say behind closed doors, if you're a fly on the wall, you hear them talking and they're saying, Bo is our starter week one at Seattle. What do we got to do to get ready for that? Then don't have any sort of contrived quarterback competition for the sake of the media or for the sake of optics or things like that. I just think, Cody, I don't know that there's an exact date to me that I think, well, you and I will talk about that. Actually, you and I maybe do have a kind of an exact date here of when we should hear of this starting quarterback competition being over. But when I say I don't think there needs to be an exact date, what I mean is that if they want to come out on day one of training camp and say Bo Nix is our starter, would you be surprised by that? I mean, or would you be taken aback by that? Would it
No.
offend you? I mean, I don't think so. I think, to me, if they know the direction, go for it. But at the same time, if you really feel like there's a chance, any percentage chance that Bo Nix is not ready to start at the beginning of the year, maybe let this drag on a little bit.
Well, and I go back to what Sean Payton had said the moment that, they traded for Zach Wilson, then they drafted Bo Nix. Remember, they released Ben DiNucci because we were like, oh, 4 quarterbacks on the Broncos roster in training camp. That's going to be interesting. They released Ben DiNucci, and Sean Payton said, hey, look, like this was more of had a conversation with Ben that, we need to figure out, like, we need to be smart with our reps, and these guys need a lot of reps. And so the same thing is when we go to OTAs and minicamp, can we completely write off Zach Wilson? I mean, I feel like based on where Bo was at, where Jarrett was at, I mean, it's clearly those two guys in the driver's seat of the quarterback competition. So if it's really between those two guys, why would you waste reps trying to get somebody else more reps? Like if they go 7-7-7, like I don't understand. Like try to give each guy, in my opinion, give them maybe 8 or 9 reps and then give Zach Wilson at the end maybe 2 reps. But it's like, don't waste your time. Don't waste reps because these reps here are valuable, right? So how do we break this down, Sayre? Like I was going through and I was going in my head and thinking, okay, hey, if I was Sean Payton, and I'm not, but if I was Sean Payton, how would I maybe approach this quarterback competition? What do I want to see before I name a starter? And I'd say the clear, definitive timeline for me, if it were up to me, and this is solely just my opinion, my speculation, I'm curious how you think about it and what Broncos fans think, but in my opinion, Sean Payton should give Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham the first 2 preseason games, right? First preseason game, I don't care who you start, whether it's Bo Nix or Jarrett Stidham, give them an entire half with the starters and the second team offense, and then give the other guy the second half, or like a quarter. I mean, it's tough though, because if you have a third quarterback in the roster, you want to be smart. You don't want to get one of your guys hurt that is possibly going to be in line for the job there. And then give the other quarterback the next week the entire first half with the starters as well. And then after that, make your decision based on your gut feeling, how you feel. Do you base it all on how they performed in those preseason games? You might have to consider it a little bit, but to me, an ideal timeline would be after preseason game number 2, when you've seen a first half with Jarrett Stidham with the starters, you've seen a first half with Bo Nix with the starters, and then I feel like that is enough information right there compiled with all the training camp practices to say, okay, this is where we're going. Now it gives you time to build that game plan for your week 1 matchup against the Seattle Seahawks around your quarterback and also the personnel around him as you start to factor in roster, building personnel. Like, you're going to cut to the 53-man roster after that third and final preseason game. So see what that starting vision looks like. The team's already going to have a great idea. To me, that is and should be the timeline. How do you feel about it? Your thoughts on that?
Well, let's throw a little bit of a wrinkle into this mix here, because let's just say after the first week of training camp, and I don't know exactly when they're going to throw the pads on and how many padded practices versus non-padded. Let's just say as they get going in more 11-on-11 stuff, they're like, let's give Zach Wilson a day out there with the first team offense. And let's say he goes out there and absolutely kills it. And just, I mean, they see the talent on display. They see the mobility. He's putting the ball in the right spot, all these sorts of things. I know we're talking hypothetical here because as of OTAs and minicamp, it seems Jarrett Stidham and Bo Nix are clearly ahead of Zach Wilson. So when we're talking about this quarterback competition being down to 2 guys, like, that's just how it seems after OTAs and minicamp. It doesn't really feel like Zach Wilson has a legit shot at the QB1 spot, but let's just say that wrinkle gets thrown in there once the pads come on and 11-on-11 is happening more frequently, and he starts making plays out there and he starts making throws. And I mean, it's just, you never know what could happen. And I think that could potentially throw a little bit of a wrench in this. But again, if all roads lead to Bo Nix, I think your plan there, Cody, is ultimately what should happen. I mean, there's a little bit of seniority with Jarrett Stidham being the oldest guy in the quarterback room. He also has a full year of experience now in Sean Payton's offense. That's awesome. If he goes out there and executes the offense, great. But if Bo Nix shows the better potential and he maybe has a few more mistakes here and there, but maybe higher highs, you know what I'm saying? And I don't think they should necessarily base this decision off of who's making the least amount of mistakes in practice. I think that got them into trouble when Kyle Orton was on the roster, right? So you want to, obviously, if you drafted a guy in the first round, get to that vision as quickly as you can, but also kind of go in it with an open mind in terms of, hey, if Zach Wilson is out there balling out, which at this point, I don't think we really expect, but if it happens, have something built in where you can have a menu for all of these guys to get enough reps to prove with that first team offense. Cause that's the big thing here is like, if Zach Wilson is out there dominating against the third team defense with the third team offense, what are we supposed to do with that information? Right.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're supposed to do with that. So you have to at least at some point get him some reps with the first team offense. But I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see if that does happen, how much of chaos there could be with this quarterback competition.
Well, maybe he even changes things too for the backup quarterback job as well behind whoever the starter may be. A lot to ponder here in Broncos country. What would your timeline be? When do you want Sean Payton, the Broncos, to announce the starter? What makes sense? Make sure you let us know if you're listening or watching Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcast. There's been a lot of offseason speculation about the potential future of Javonte Williams as a member of the Broncos. Could his roster spot be in jeopardy? We debate that here on today's episode of the show. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know, at FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And even though there aren't a lot of sports that are going on right now, FanDuel lets you stay involved in the world of sports. I love sports so much. I never want them to stop. I know you feel the same exact way. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And there are less and less action on the television. But FanDuel lets me keep sports going whenever I want. And all I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. One thing I always do right before the NFL season begins, I go in and I do NFL futures. I go ahead and I go through and select who I think will win offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year, MVP. I like to do that ahead of time at FanDuel Sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel, they are hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Is Javonte Williams' roster spot with the Denver Broncos in jeopardy? This topic has been discussed a lot this offseason, and you know what? We're going to get down to the bottom of it and figure out whether or not it is actually going to happen. Could Javonte Williams, the former second-round pick, be cut this offseason? We're going to break that down on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. But before we do that, I want to say thank you to all of you everyday listeners of Locked on Broncos. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day every single day, and ramp that up to 2-3 listens. Hey, you know what? Listen to us actually every day of the week. If you don't already, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or go over to YouTube and do the same, and stick around on YouTube for Locked On Sports Today. Make that your second listen. Heck, throw it on if you're working from home like I do. Throw on Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Sports Network, your team every day. Javonte Williams has been a hot topic of discussion after last year, where he struggled to average 3 yards a carry down the stretch of the season. Just looked like he hit a wall. And coming back from the ACL injury that he suffered in 2022 against the Las Vegas Raiders, I mean, it's understandable, right? He made kind of a miraculous comeback to the practice field in the first place. You and I, a year ago at this time, Cody, we weren't sure how much are we going to see Javonte Williams at the beginning of the regular season. And really, he came out. It was impressive that he got back onto the field, that he didn't really miss any time last year due to that injury. And unfortunate thing is that we didn't see the same guy. He wasn't dragging around the Ravens defenders and the Cowboys defenders like he was his rookie year, right? And even when he got involved in the pass game, seemed like he kind of had a case of the yips, a lot of drops, a lot of bad reps out there on the field in games when he was counted on to do a lot for this offense. So let's talk about the I guess realistic is the word I'm looking for, the realistic chance that Javonte could be cut. And at the same time, maybe he's in a position battle there with the other veteran in this running back stable.
Yeah, in terms of like realistic, I mean, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, right? Like, do we expect that to happen? I don't expect that to happen, but it could happen. Like every year in the NFL and training camp, like you see some of these surprise releases, surprise cuts. And oftentimes you see it happen with some running backs in the National Football League. But I do think that Sean Payton is embracing Javonte, getting back to where he can be. I think with the idea of patience, right? Because he told us during OTAs and minicamp, he said, hey, like, a lot of the doctors, and our medical team says, it takes about 2 years to truly get back to where you're comfortable with doing the things that you used to be doing. And certainly I think maybe that's the grace period, but this will be the second season coming off of that ACL, LCL, MCL. He had a whole complete knee reconstruction. It wasn't just an ACL, folks. It was a complete knee reconstruction. That's how bad his knee injury was. So, Sayre, the fact that you used the word miraculous, that exactly describes when we went to the first day of Broncos training camp last year and Javonte was dressed and ready to go. We're like, wow, okay. Like we were uncertain. Like the Broncos even put out something on their website saying they weren't sure if he was going to be there. And then all of a sudden, day one, Javonte's there. He's suited up. The reason we're talking about this is maybe one of the bigger questions of going into training camp is I felt like it was interesting. Our good friend Mike Kliss, 9 News Insider, wrote something recently that I thought kind of caught my attention a little bit. He mentioned in terms of the running back position that Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, those guys are guaranteed to be on the roster, so to speak, in terms of his own belief, and that the last spot would either go to Samaje Perine or Javonte Williams. So my question here is, who is it going to be and why? And so I think really if we're breaking it down in that regard, how do we factor in like Javonte versus Samaje? Like as a rusher, Samaje last year for the Broncos didn't get a lot of touches overall in terms of carrying the football, even though when he did carry the football, his yards per run were pretty good. His average was pretty solid. I think it was like 4.6 or something along those lines, but it wasn't a big enough sample size in terms, I think he had 50 touches, 50 carries overall last season. But he did provide tremendous value for the Broncos as a pass catcher on third down, running back out of the backfield. And I don't know how many times he moved the chains for Denver, got them into field goal range, kept drives alive. Like you can't ignore that. The question is, do you believe that room right there is revitalized? I think Jaleel McLaughlin, I've been on the record of saying this since OTAs. I think Jaleel is going to have a massive role for the team this upcoming season. I think Sean Payton sees it. Sean Payton has certainly hinted to it, and Jaleel has wanted to take on more of a workload. I mean, not sure if we can read into this in any way, shape, or form, but Jaleel McLaughlin was the only running back that we saw outside of Michael Burton, who's the fullback, that went to the throw session in Texas with Jarrett Stidham and obviously Bo Nix, all the receivers, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, Little Jordan Humphrey, Michael Bandy, Jalen Virgil, Marvin Mims. And I found that to be a little interesting. It's like, all right, see, Jaleel's there, and Jaleel is putting in work. But does this all lead to the notion that, hey, like the Broncos, it could be in the final days here, Javonte? I personally don't want that to be the case. I think Javonte, if healthy, and you and I have talked about this ad nauseum on the show, Javonte is an impact player when fully healthy. When he's running through defense, like yards after contact, he's fighting for extra yardage. Like that is what we saw in 2021 from him, and he's a special player. And even though he had a down year last year, he still somehow managed to get 1,000 all-purpose yards, which that was a tough thing for the Broncos offense last season for some of their players. So I find that to be something that we hang on to, but I think that there is going to be pressure on Javonte here once training camp begins. I think it's going to be something we're going to be looking at the notepad every day. How does Javonte look? What did Javonte do today? What other running back did stuff? You know, outside of like the Audric Estimes and the Jaleel McLaughlins, like how did Blake Watson do? What did Tyler Beatty do? What did Samaje Perine do? Like these are things that we're going to be monitoring closely outside of just the quarterback position.
I think Javonte is going to be a man possessed out there after hearing all the stuff this offseason. I mean, he's been on the every list that I look at, Cody, as the offseason content mill continues to churn out articles and listicles and things like that. I mean, Javonte is on every on the bubble, could be traded, players that are stocked down, you know, all these and I've written some of these things. Like he's on all of them. He's on every single list. And the reason is the way that he played last season. I think he undoubtedly hears all that stuff. And if he doesn't hear it himself, I guarantee you somebody's telling him, so that when he does get out there on the field and the pads come on, he is going to start dragging people again. Because everybody says like the second year back from ACL, which I know you've had. I've never torn an ACL, but people say the second year
twice.
Back from an ACL. Cody's torn it twice, people. So look at that. I mean, but look, he's second year coming back. People always say, well, the second year coming back is always better than the first and yada, yada. And I get that. Time removed from injury. I think we're going to see him out there absolutely demolishing people. And the thing that he needs to do to beat out Samaje Perine for a roster spot, beyond just proving that he's more efficient on a per carry basis, is what Javonte didn't do last year that Samaje did, is come out onto the field during 2 minute and provide the Broncos with an absolute weapon in 2 minute drill. I mean, Samaje Perine, we're all sitting there wondering week after week, why not start off the game with the Samaje Perine offense, right? I mean, just throw him out there at the beginning and run the 2 minute drill if that's what you got to do. I know it's not as simple as that, but that's what people are calling for, because every time he was out there in 2 minute drill, boom, 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 the Broncos moved the ball down the field. And he was a big reason for that. Yards after the catch, actually breaking tackles, making those catches in the first place, making tough catches in traffic, bailing out the quarterback, pass protecting, all of these things that he did. Javonte Williams has historically done very well. He was known as the best pass protecting back in the 2021 draft. He can catch passes. We know that. He caught a high volume last year, even though the yards after catch was not good. That's where he needs to be better. Yards after contact, yards after the catch, creating in the 2 minute drill. If Javonte can prove that he can do that, I think he's going to easily fend off Samaje Perine for a roster spot. And maybe the Broncos could even get something of value, because there's a lot of teams out there that have terrible running back situations that Samaje could help. So I think the Broncos might be able to get value out of him one way or the other.
And I will say, I do remember there being a game where Javonte flashed a little bit of the old stuff, and it wasn't that Buffalo Bills game. Like he and Russell Wilson, I remember Russ had that throw after getting absolutely blasted. Javonte caught it, was able to get in for a touchdown late in that game, and the rest kind of writes itself. It was an impressive drive, not only by Russ, but the Broncos offense, but also by Javonte Williams. And so, give credit there. But I agree, you're absolutely right. there is a lot of eyes, and I think there is a lot of pressure on Javonte going into training camp, and I'm curious to see how he responds, and I think we're excited to see how he responds here for the Broncos in training camp, which is just around the corner here. Broncos Country. Make sure you continue to check Ticketmaster if you want to attend some of the practices. There may be spots that open up. Make sure you check it out in Dove Valley. Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit. Well, our other question, one of the bigger ones as well as we get into the training camp series here, is which new addition will have the biggest impact for the Broncos in 2024? Sayre and I will debate and we'll discuss here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, want to say thank you once again to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks once again for making us your first listen of the day every single day. And for your second listen, make sure you check out the Locked On NFL podcast. You get a broad spectrum of NFL topics that are going on right now from the local experts on the biggest stories. Check it out today wherever you get your podcasts or available on YouTube. A lot of new additions, a lot of new faces here for the 2024 Denver Broncos. We know forecasting ahead to 2025's offseason, there's going to be 26 unrestricted free agents set to hit the market here for Denver. So you get 17 new faces in here from the NFL free agency period and the NFL draft, couple of trades here and there. And all of a sudden, the conversation about this Broncos team, you see a lot of national media outlets talking about they have the 31st ranked roster and all the NFL. I don't care about none of that stuff. To be honest with you, I don't think they're in that range. There are a lot of people that really don't pay attention to the Denver Broncos, but I do think that there are a handful of new additions that could have a big impact this upcoming season. Let's start off on the offensive side of the ball. Sayre, to me, I kind of went with non-quarterback. I think the easy answer for so many, like including myself, I wanted to do. I was like, Bo Nix. Let's talk about Bo Nix. But we have talked about Bo quite a bit. So I went non-quarterback option. And to me, Sayre, the one guy I think could have the biggest impact from the offensive standpoint in terms of new additions, I think Josh Reynolds, who obviously carved out a little bit of a role for himself in mini camp and OTAs, reliable, consistent, not going to be the top option for Denver's offense, but so far has proven that he can be a reliable third or even fourth option here behind Cortland Sutton, behind Tim Patrick. He's my pick. Who is yours and where are you at with that?
Well, I love that pick. First of all, I think Josh Reynolds is going to be hugely valuable to this offense and certainly in the areas that you mentioned. I mean, one of the best quarterback ratings when targeted of any receiver in the league last year, top 12 in that category. So he's obviously going to make a huge impact. I went with Audric Estime because I do believe, Cody, that we're going to see quite a bit of a committee approach. I've researched a few of Sean Payton's teams from his time in New Orleans. You know, people like to talk about the Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara crew that they had, the duo that they had there. But what about when they were rocking with guys like Chris Ivory, Pierre Thomas, Darren Sproles, all on the same team, right? When they had three backs that they were trying to get involved, and they did, and he did it effectively. Sean Payton did, in terms of getting those guys touches, getting them carries, involving them in the offense. I do feel like we could see a lot of that this year, because what does Audric Estime have that nobody else on the Broncos really had last year. He's creating yardage after contact on freakishly consistent basis. Over 900 yards after contact last year at Notre Dame. And this is a guy that touched 21 miles per hour on the in-game GPS in a game last year against Louisville. So he's deceptively fast for his size, a big body back, and young running backs are always super, super valuable because they bring those fresh legs to the NFL, right? When the longer guys are in the NFL, the tougher it is. Like longevity at the running back position is almost like jumbo shrimp. It's an oxymoron, right? You don't see a lot of longevity at that position. So guys that are coming in with fresher legs like Audric Estime can make a huge impact. Now, defensively, I think this is a fascinating deal because the Broncos added a lot of guys defensively, a couple of new starters, a handful of new starters potentially for a defense that really stunk a lot of last season. I mean, the first 6-7 games last year and then the final 4-5 games, they were not good. They needed these personnel changes. Who do you have as the new addition making the biggest impact here in 2024?
I mean, this one could obviously maybe even end up being the biggest addition for Denver all offseason in terms of impact. I went with John Franklin Myers. I mean, the fact that the Broncos were able to get him in terms of the capital in which they did, obviously a reworked deal in Denver. I feel like in terms of what he can bring to the defensive line, just seeing him during OTAs and minicamp, big body, and he's fierce. Like he's very physical, which is something I don't want to say the Broncos haven't had at a consistent basis, but there's been a lack of that from time to time. Now they have a guy who I feel like can really command double teams. And if he commands double teams, that leaves one-on-ones either for your other defensive end. It allows your nose tackle to maybe get more penetration, or your outside linebackers get more one-on-ones. We've talked about him when we did our training camp position preview series, the amount of pressures in terms of, he was just a rotational player with the LA Rams. He pressured the quarterback at a high rate. And a lot of people are saying, well, that's because he's playing next to Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald's getting in here. There's different matchups. Like that's all created off that. Well, then he went to New York. Didn't even start right away in New York. Pressured the quarterback at a high rate. Then he finally earned a full-time starting job. Pressured the quarterback, had a career. I think the career high is 27 total pressures in one season for him at that position is impressive. And then last year, obviously, had another really good year in terms of pressuring the quarterback, getting obviously sacks, getting to the QB. That to me, I think is going to be the biggest addition that the Broncos have made. You talked about the defense and it stinking last year the way that it did. I think you add a guy like JFM to the mix there. I think he'll have some success here for the Broncos. He'll also lead to the defense being much better. And I feel like out of all the additions, and there's quite a bit on the defensive side of the ball, he's the one I don't have questions about. And I think his impact will be big. Where are you leaning when it comes to the defense, the newest addition? Who do you think will have the biggest impact?
I went with Brandon Jones for this. And I think that this kind of goes against a little bit of conventional thinking because Justin Simmons, he's one of the best in Broncos history. Yeah. 30 interceptions since 2016, most in the NFL of any defensive back or any defensive player just in general. I mean, he's been a machine when it comes to turning the ball over and setting the example in terms of on-field leadership, off-the-field leadership. Like Justin Simmons is that guy. He's a legendary Bronco, in my opinion, all-timer. But Brandon Jones coming in, he kind of reminds me, not stylistically in terms of the way that he plays necessarily, but the situation sort of reminds me a little bit of when Darian Stewart came to the Denver Broncos back in 2014, I believe. And he came over from the Baltimore Ravens. And you're thinking like, well, why did the Broncos just sign this guy? Like he was a backup for the Ravens. He was a backup for the Rams. Like he didn't necessarily even play a ton of snaps, even though like when he did, like he's just benefiting from playing with the Ravens defense, right? That's got to be what it is. He's just benefiting from all this talent around him. And he comes to Denver and was a key piece of that Super Bowl 50 team, was outstanding for a handful of years in Denver and a great playmaker on the back end of that defense. Maybe the opportunity is just right for somebody like Brandon Jones, because last year, I know he didn't play 100% of the snaps by any means, but and I also know that Pro Football Focus grades are not the end all be all, but he graded out a 75.4 on Pro Football Focus grades, Cody, the 17th highest grade among safeties in the NFL. Here's what they said. He ended 2023 with 4 pressures on 10 pass rush snaps. He held up in coverage, yielding only 55 yards across 14 targets, and he led the Dolphins safety group with 15 total stops and set career highs in coverage grade and overall grade. So this is an ascending player, former 3rd-round pick, who's coming in, and the opportunity is right there for him to go out and say, all right, you're going to play 100% of the snaps now, or close to 100%. We need you to keep that efficiency across the board. And I think he's going to make a huge impact and give his very best in his first year as like a full-time, like unquestioned starter for this Denver Broncos defense.
I like it. And if that does play out the way that you outlined it, I think the Broncos will be an exciting team to watch this upcoming season. I think they will be better on the defensive side of the ball. I'm excited to see how the new addition of obviously Jim Leonard is the defensive backs coach, passing game coordinator, how that impacts things, how Vance Joseph's pressure packages maybe align with even the secondary and the safety outside of just PJ and Jaquan blitzing from the nickel. You could see some different looks this upcoming season, which I'm excited to see play out here. And I think these are some important questions here, Broncos country, that we left you here. And we want to know your answer to all of them. How long do you think the Broncos QB position battle will and should last? When should it be answered? Javonte Williams is his roster spot in jeopardy. And obviously rounding things out, who will be the biggest impact? Who will provide the biggest impact from the new additions this offseason? These are things we're going to leave with you here today. Make sure you let us know here. But thank you once again for making us your first listen of the day. To all you everydayers out there in Broncos country, we appreciate you. And as always, we'll be back tomorrow for another episode of the show. We'll dive into 3 of the biggest questions that the Broncos coaching staff must be ready to answer this upcoming season. You're going to get that and much more. And for your second listen of the day after this episode, go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, or available on YouTube. Broncos country, we'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the show.